Hi, I wanted to come on here today and give another book review. Today's book is a book that I've heard a lot about for quite a number of years, but I've just never read it myself until recently. It's called Hatchet by Gary Paulsen. And I want to say up front that this book has been on the challenged and banned book list and still is in some places due to the graphic descriptions of trauma and injury. Before I even knew this, as I was reading it, I was making a list of some of the warnings and the various things that I wanted to tell you about. So this book does involve death, heart attack, divorce, adultery. It only talks about a kiss, but it is still an adulterous kiss, and you are made aware of that. There is a brief discussion of a suicide attempt. There are a few curse words, and the main character does use God's name in vain a few times. So you should definitely use your own discernment as to whether your child is ready for this content, and you might even want to read it yourself first. The book's short. It's under 4 hours on audiobook, so it would be a pretty quick read if you wanted to read it yourself first. Scholastic does recommend this book for grades 6 and up. One of the middle schools that I worked at did read it with all of their 6th graders. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have a student read it until they're in 8th grade or above, but that's just me. The book did win a Newbery Honor and is considered a young adult wilderness survival novel. I wanted to review it because not only is it a book that some schools could choose to read class-wide, but probably the question that I get asked the most when it comes to reading is, do I have any good book recommendations for boys? And it can be difficult to find good books for boys that are high interest. I think this one would do the trick though. It's pretty action-packed from the very beginning. It starts with a plane crash happening within the first few pages. From there, just imagine if Bear Grylls were to write a fiction book. And as an added bonus, it brings in some science content when the main character is remembering back to things that he learned in his science class in order to survive. He's remembering back on some of the lessons that he learned. So that's kind of interesting as well, and not something you get in a lot of fiction novels. Essentially, this is the story of how Brian, the main character, survives a plane crash in the wilderness. It reads very much like a nonfiction book, which boys do tend to like nonfiction better. And it is very adventure-packed. Many of the events in Hatchet were actually inspired by the real-life events of the author. So it seems very realistic because it's based on some of the events in his life. In fact, the author wrote another book about the adventures that inspired Hatchet, and that book is called Guts. This is also the first of 5 books in the series, and I think there's a movie that I've only found it available through YouTube called A Cry in the Wild, and that was based on Hatchet as well. Now, I do want to say though, without having viewed or read any of those things I just talked about, Guts, the entire series, or A Cry in the Wild, I don't really want to say too much about them or recommend them. I do think that this book would be good for those adventure-loving, outdoorsy people in your life, girl or boy. Again, though, with some of the serious issues that the book covers, I would recommend that you read it yourself first to decide if it's right for your student. As a side note, Gary Paulsen, the author, has many, many, many more books. So if your student ends up liking this book, then you have an author that you can go to for more reading recommendations for your student. So as we conclude, just to summarize, Hatchet is an action-packed, adventurous book. It is part of a series, meaning there might be other books to read after it. It is a high interest read for boys. The author has written many other books that your students may like as well if they like this one. However, there are some sensitive issues discussed, so I would suggest that you read it first, as well as a little bit of profanity, and the Lord's name is taken in vain a few times. Thank you so much for watching. Feel free to like this Facebook page so that you see future videos that I put out, including book reviews and study tips. And also, if you would like more information about any of the tutoring sessions that I offer, just email me. My contact information will be at the end of this video. Thank you.